G'day guys. Today on the channel, I just want to have a look at a topic that pops up regularly on the forums and in-game, and that's about the effectiveness of the British tree, and whether you should or shouldn't play it. And maybe you've been wondering whether or not you should give it a go. And I'm hoping that just touching on some parts of this, that you'll maybe now consider to give it a go. It might answer some of your questions. It might sort of uh, help you decide to give it a go. Now, um, let's have a look. What do people say about the British tree? From the negative point of view, the biggest issue people have with it is that it's solid shot ammunition. A lot of people don't like solid shot ammunition. They've come from nations that use APHE, which is pretty much all nations other than Britain. And they've either learnt how to use APHE as their primary ammunition, which means that they've learnt where to aim and what to expect from those kind of penetrations. Or they've also tried using solid shot on some of those other nations and being less effective with it, and that's coloured their opinion on solid shot ammunition in general. So I just want to point out the reason why I think people should disregard this and give it a go. Solid shot ammunition works differently. A penetrating round causes shrapnel. It doesn't explode. APHE will explode in the middle of the tank, and like a grenade, it will kill the crew, damage modules, explode ammunition, etc, etc. Which is an easy way to kill if you can penetrate. But it may be difficult to find that penetrating shot, in which case you really do have to find weak points. British tanks are an opposite turn of that coin. They have high penetration, so they're very reliable at most tanks that they shoot at in the thickest armor. But they don't explode, so on impact their damage is from shrapnel, which spreads out from the point of impact in a cone. That cone spreads out. The further it goes, the larger the cone gets, meaning the more modules it'll damage, crew it'll kill. Biggest problem I see here is people shoot directly for crew or modules, which with APHE is generally a good thing. Not good with solid shot, because what happens is modules and crew absorb the shrapnel, meaning that if you shoot for a driver and he absorbs 80% of the shrapnel from the point of impact, then the 20% of the shrapnel that's left over will spread out through the tank and do very little damage. So it all comes down to where to shoot to avoid crew, to avoid modules, etc. directly upon impact. I've already made a video about this in the past, so if you want to check that out, go for it. And it just explains aiming for center of mass, understanding where your enemy tank's crew are, and adjusting your aim accordingly so that the most amount of crew are hit by the most amount of shrapnel possible in that single shot. That's the biggest issue people have. The second biggest issue people have with Britain is the lack of mobility. Now, in large part, I guess that is true, but it's not completely true. Tier 1 and Tier 2, I don't believe Britain are any worse off than most other nations. The Tetrac, the A13, you're looking at 48 to 67 kilometers an hour, 88 kilometers an hour on the T17E1. At Tier 2, you've got the Crusader tanks, you've got the Cromwell tanks, and the AEC, which is still up to 66 kilometers an hour. To be fair, Britain doesn't really have any light tanks at this tree. Now the Crusaders, I believe, now have the functioning of a light tank, finally. But in large part, Britain at this point loses the ability of light tanks. It's not until you get to I think the Warrior is the next vehicle you get that you can utilize as a light vehicle. So that is disappointing, and hopefully something they fix in the future. At Tier 3, that's when you do start to see this reputation kick in. But I still don't think it's 100% fair. You have tanks like the Challenger, the Avengers, the Comet, even the Achilles to a degree. These aren't the slowest tanks in the world. Like, the Achilles is only 44 kilometers an hour. The Avenger is 52 kilometers an hour. The Challenge is 52 kilometers an hour. The Comet is 52 as well, and 44 for the AA. So, you do have some speed there. And not only that, but you've now got speed with the 17-pounder gun. 17-pounder gun, you're starting off with penetration of 171mm stock. This Achilles here is battle rating 4.0. And if you get something like the Challenger here, you get the Shot SV Mark 1. 228mm penetration. If you understand and if you've learnt the penetration mechanics by now and the damage mechanics that go along with solid shot ammunition, this shot here is the only shot you're going to need. You've now got the penetration and the ability to kill tanks. The Comet doesn't use a 17-pounder gun. It's got a 77 HV. It's not a 17-pounder gun. It's not a variation of the 17-pounder gun. It's actually it's a modification of the 75mm gun. Project 75mm HV that the Brits were working on for a while, trying to create a high velocity 75mm round. They ended up dropping the project, and later on they revived the program and they bored out the 75 so that it could fire a 17-pounder projectile from a 75mm round casing, and then they increased the powder on it. So it does fire a 17-pounder round, but it's actually a 75mm shell and breech, and that's why it doesn't have quite the performance of the 17-pounder round. Then you've got the British tanks, which this middle line here mostly represents the heavy tank line. Britain now trades with this line. You trade firepower in most cases, except for, say, the Churchill Mark 1 at 3.0. You still have the 2-pounder gun, which you at this point is getting long in the tooth. It's still got decent penetration, and it's got a fantastic rate of fire, and it is useful. It's a trade. The Churchill Mark 3 has a 6-pounder gun. It's very powerful, very good penetration, good reload, less post damage because of the solid shot ammunition, but it's a very usable gun. The Churchill Mark 7, you now got a 75mm gun. That's the American caliber that you're used to on the Shermans. It's technically a British variant of the gun, so it's slightly different. Uses solid shot ammunition instead of the APHE round. It's modified, removed the explosive, and I think it might have concrete in it actually. But it's a decent round, a decent gun that can have a purpose. It's got 103mm of penetration at point blank range, so at close enough ranges you can kill most of the tanks on 4.7 that you're going to face, if you know where to shoot. For the most part, it's not the gun on this tank that you want, it's the armor. My recommendation is to find an open bit of ground where the most amount of tanks can see you at the furthest amount of range. Let those tanks shoot at you, absorb the damage, use your gun to track tanks, knock out barrels, do secondary damage. Don't expect to get kills, but you will get a lot of RP and silver lions from all the damage that you take and all the crits that you might make. Let your friendlies get the kills. Don't get too bogged down on your kill count, because your ability to hold the enemy up will win battles. And then the Brits have the Avengers and the Challenger, which are fast. Use those similar in the way that you might use a Hellcat. Use the speed with a powerful gun. I would try to be a little less in your face as you might be with a Hellcat. So just try to be a bit more discreet. Get on the edges of the map. Let your gun do all the work. Now, Tier 4 is where you start to see the real flavour of British tanks. And this is where I'm going to get into why I really like British tanks. Because it's a playstyle that works for me. In the most part here, this is where you learn Britain are some of the best, if not the best, hull-down vehicles in the game. And the biggest weak point on these tanks, at least in these two lines here especially, in most part, is the hull. Depending on the tiering, some of these hulls are okay. The Carnarvon's got fantastic frontal armor on it, but the Centurion and stuff, you can bounce shots, but you'll never rely on that armor, or you should never rely on that armor. But you do have turrets that can survive a hit, very strong turrets. I took some screenshots the other day of the armor on the Centurion turrets, Carnarvon Mark 3, Mark 10, and I showed how effective some of this armor thickness is, because it's multiple layers of, varying thickness of armor. So the turret is very strong. You've got a gun that can kill the enemy at a long range. You've got accuracy. You've got what is it? Minus 10 gun depression, which is very nice. It's maybe not quite what you're used to in some of your previous vehicles. Let's have a look. We've got the Avengers here. Minus 10. Yeah, okay. You got the Matildas down here, which for a long time had the greatest depression in the game, minus 20. So you've got the gun depression, you've got the reload, you've got the range. Because the high velocity gun on these things, if you're unaware, let's just have a quick look. I'll try and show you how easy these things are to fire at range compared to their enemy. Sorry. Okay, so you see here, it's quite a high velocity round, and it's not hard. You can easily eyeball the enemy. That's a Panther at about 800 meters, I think. No problem going through him with a 17-pounder gun. And you can see that I really didn't even have to aim. That this round shoots so flat that you don't have to be the most accurate person in the world, and you can still hit the targets with the first or second shot at range. So it just shows you how much capability there is there to hit the target quickly and accurately. Now, not only do you have that ability of the high velocity guns, you've got the fast reload, you've got stabilizers. Starting at reserve tier, you have shoulder mounted guns which have rudimentary level of stabilization. You get it through the 6-pounder guns. The 75mm and the 17-pounder guns lose that capability, so around tier 3 here, you go back to like everybody else, just firing, stopping, aiming, firing, but you've still got really, really good gun control, probably the fastest stop and fire ability of all the nations still. At tier 4, starting with the 4202, Centurion Mark 3, none of these tank destroyers here, you have stabilizers again, vertical and horizontal stabilization, 2-plane stabilization. You are unmatched. The only people that have this ability are people that are using British tanks, like the Swedish. So you've got a big advantage here. Go hull down. Cover your weak spots. Cover your hull. If you have to show your hull, make sure it's the front of your hull. It's obviously going to be your best penetration. Your best protection against enemy penetration. Use your high velocity, long range, accurate guns to get those kills. Where the enemy are struggling, you're hard to see with your low profile turrets, you're well protected, and they can't match you for first shot capabilities, and they can't match you for reload. And this is a general style that goes for the whole tree. You've now traded your speed. You've dropped down to about 48 kilometers an hour at most, which you're not going to see. If you're wondering, you're going to sit around 35 kilometers an hour, which at this stage you've gotten used to because at tier 4 and 5, that's really what you're doing in all these tanks. But you're doing 35 kilometers an hour everywhere. That's the thing about British tanks, is they're consistent. So even though you might be out there with the Leopard tanks and the light tanks and the scout tanks, they're out there capping, you're not very far behind. You will get to those cap points before they are captured in more situations than not. The chieftains have effective armor thickness. So the hull, I believe, is only about 76 millimeters of armor on it. 86 millimeters of hull armor on it, but it's sloped really, really well. So it ricochets and bounces a lot of shots. The lower glacis, garbage. Don't let anybody shoot you in the lower glacis. Turret armor, very bouncy. Anyone short of APF SDS will bounce on this turret. Even heat FS, missiles, ATGMs, etc., they will bounce. I have bounced a lot of shots off these tanks. Don't expect it to happen every time, but it does happen. More so than you might experience with other nations. Challenger Mark IIs, these are upgrades. They just progressively get better and better. They get more and more. So if we have a look at the Challenger Mark III, Challenger Mark III is actually a Challenger 1, an upgraded variant to Mark III. Not to be confused with the Challenger 2s or the Challenger 2Fs. They may look very similar, but they're only about 30% the same. Just having a quick look at those, you'll see there's a lot of armor on these things. The turret protection's quite strong. Like most MBTs, the weakness is the mantlet and this quite large driver's port here. Your upper hull, very bouncy, very strong. Turret cheeks, very strong. And that's for chemical and APF SDS. It's one thing the British do quite well. Unfortunately, what they don't do well is this lower glacis area here. Even with this protection, you're only looking about 300 millimeters of penetration. Protection on the sides, 400 millimeters. You do get fuel protection now. These fuel tanks on the outside might sound like a bad idea, but they're not. They absorb heat FS, they absorb ABF SDS, they absorb shrapnel, etc. Not all the time, but they do it more often than when it's not there. So this is actually a strength in the tank design. And a little bit of something that they added this patch that a lot of people aren't aware of is they added up to, okay, so this variant here, it's only 5 millimeters, but they did add armored bins to the explosive charges, added additional protection. So don't expect a lot of protection on your hull, but it is an improvement. And then if you have a quick look at this one here, it's very much the same. It is a completely new generation of tank. The Challenger Mark II, like I said, it's only about 30% similar to the Challenger. Even though they look very similar, they're not. You've got the same sort of, this is with the upgraded armor package on the 2F. You've got all the additional armor protection on the outside and on the turret. You now have a larger mantlet. These days the mantlet does absorb most of the damage. Previously, I think some of this armor wasn't here, so the shot would just go straight through and you weren't having a very good day. Previously, I think it was only about 30 millimeters here, so if you penned it, you're in a lot of trouble. Alright, but this is what you're looking for too. This is the upgrade that they just got, up to 200 millimeters of armor protection on the charge bins. In the past, if they got through your armor, especially down low here, the shrapnel damage would spread through and detonate your charge bins down here. Now that doesn't happen, so that's really, really nice. And now cage armor works, at least to some extent, on the British tanks. It's not as good as the Swedish or the Chinese, and I'm assuming the Russians, but at least it does work sometimes. And this is inert ammunition in the turret. It will not detonate. It's solid ammo. Tier 4, 5, and 6, or 5, 6, 7. Go hull down, get a good vantage spot, engage the enemy at the longest possible ranges, and then once you've thinned the herd, then you can be aggressive, push hard, use your good reload. It's not the best reload, but it's a good reload. Good penetration. Again, not the best penetration. In fact, it's one of the worst at top tier, which is very different to what it's like for the rest of the tree. But honestly, I've never driven around a Challenger 2 and thought, oh geez, I wish I had penetration. I just never have. Tier 6. Now, what I haven't mentioned here is the swing fire and the striker. That's because they're dead to me. Complete garbage. The warrior, it's decent. I am not very good with these kind of vehicles, so I'm not going to give you it's a good or a bad sort of breakdown on this. It's capable, and I'll have to let you to make your decision on that. But what you do have here is you've got the Roycat and the Vickers. These came in the last previous 3 patches, I think. Good mobility with the Leopard 2 hull, British turret. It's a winning combination. The turret protection of a British tank with the hull mobility and protection of a German tank. The Roycat gives you speed and mobility, which up to this point you'd kind of been lacking for a while, and allows you to be a scouty boy. It's quite nice. You also get the premium variant of that, which is, I haven't bought it, but if I was still running at the British tanks, I would have bought that. AA wise, this is probably the last AA you're going to want to use, the Falcon. Chieftain Marksman is garbage. it's just horrible, especially stock. Terrible ammo count on it. Only 40 rounds of APDS on it. And even then, the barrels are so far apart that you can't possibly hit a tank with both guns. So half those rounds just fire off into space. The Stormer, great at killing helicopters. Okay at ambushing side and rear of enemy tanks. You get 16 rounds ready to go from the start, and they all reload once you start reloading. Once you start firing those guns or those barrels, they instantly start to reload. So you don't have to empty all of them and then wait for this huge reload, which is great. The Falcon, I do have a video on the fantastic ammunition or the fantastic performance that this thing has. An example of it against Russian heavy tanks. It's very good penetration, very fast rate of fire, decent mobility. It's very nice. So a lot of people don't bother playing these two. This is the best tank they have, or the best AA they have at this point. Premiums are mostly variants of what they already have in the tree. The AC4 Australian tank, it's almost completely made up, but it's nice. It's just not realistic for what it's meant to be. And you get some additional firepower here with the 3.7-inch RAM, if you can still find some place to get that. And then you've just got things like another Churchill, which I don't think you can even get on the store anymore, another Centurion, another Centurion, another Centurion, and I'm not saying any of these are bad. This is actually the worst 6.7 in the British 6.7 lineup when it comes to at least the medium / heavy tank designs. These are actually all better than this one. This one here is just for the lols, and this one here is actually a very solid grind tank. It's very good. It's only 8.3, but it's still very effective at grinding with. It makes good money. The ERA on it is very trolly, and it's just a great little tank. So, but I would probably recommend this one as your main grind vehicle if you're looking for a top tier in the British tree. But if you're leaning towards an actual MBT, then the shot hull is very nice. So, hopefully this hasn't gone on for too long. 25 minutes by the looks. Ultimately, let's recap. You've got the best reload, summarizing here, generalizing. You've got the best reload, you've got the best hull down capability, you've got some of the best turret armor, you've got penetration, or some of the best penetration, some of the best accuracies. Like really, the only real downsides of these are the top tier, the top speed. Top speed is average, and the solid shot ammunition. Those are the two biggest issues people have with this. And if you can start early and learn how to utilize those things well, then you're going to do really well in the British tanks. These are very easy tanks to play. and for me, of all the nations that I play, these are my favourite. So I hope some of you have been wondering whether or not you should try this tree out. You've heard the bad stories, you've heard the scares, but you've wanted to give it a go, but just haven't had the guts to try it. Give it a go. Try it out. If you don't like it, what have you lost, really? If you do, these are some of the most fun tanks to play, in my opinion, especially around 6.7 and 4.7. If you have any questions, if there's anything I've missed, if you have something you want to add or tell me I'm wrong about, leave a comment down below in the chat. Otherwise, have yourselves a great day, and I will catch you all next time. Thank you for watching the video. Please like and subscribe.